The life paths don't matter in Cyberpunk 2077, or they have a much smaller effect on the story than you would hope that they have. I mean, if there were ever a game that sold itself on false marketing, it would be Cyberpunk. And one of the most disappointing aspects of the game for me was how little impact the life paths had on the main campaign. There were a couple of unique dialogue options, but they all led to the same situation I could have gotten if I'd picked another life path. So, while CD Projekt failed to integrate story and gameplay like they did when they made The Witcher 3, this doesn't mean that the life paths were a waste of time. Because while they failed to do my favourite storytelling technique in games by weaving it in with the gameplay, making a story that could only be told in a video game, the life paths still work from a purely narrative standpoint. V has a character arc. Hell, I go so far as to say they're my favourite RPG protagonist. This is true across all the endings in the game. A problem I have with branching stories in games is that instead of crafting the strongest narrative the developers can, they instead craft multiple stories and leave it up to the player to try and figure out which is the most satisfying. The more endings a game has, the harder it's going to be to try and figure out which ending makes the most sense. And getting the best ending may not necessarily be the most satisfying one. I feel like I need to get inside my character's head and figure out what they would most likely say in any given situation, and try and guide the narrative in a way where my character is rewarded or punished based on the limited information that I don't input into them. Most players will pick the morally correct choice in games like Cyberpunk, and while I understand wanting to play as an altruist as video games are an escapism, and the majority of humans are naturally kind, I just find it so boring. The quickest way to make a terrible protagonist is to make them have no faults. It's a mistake many first-time writers make. Now, this isn't the game's writer's fault, as they're going to give you multiple options of how to play, but this is the chief reason why silent protagonists are terrible in my eyes, because they have no faults and nothing to latch onto. Mass Effect does it better because it gives you the choice of an origin, but it fails to show you that origin, so you quickly forget it and play Shepard as a stock standard military person. This is the greatest strength of Cyberpunk's life paths. It shows you your character's origins and establishes to you, the player, what kind of person you'll be roleplaying as. Now, you don't have to follow this setup, and most players won't because they will automatically pick all the morally correct options rather than the realistic ones, because they want a good ending, even though the good ending might not necessarily be the best one. But finally getting to the topic of this video, why the Corpo path is the best one to choose. Now, we've already established that from a gameplay perspective, it doesn't matter which life path you choose, so the decision is solely based on the narrative of Cyberpunk. While any Western RPG worth its salt will give you multiple endings, Cyberpunk also gives you multiple beginnings. Usually during an RPG, everyone starts at the same place, a blank slate, and it's up to the player to decide where the story ends up. But Cyberpunk gives you the choice of where the story starts, and for me, who plays how I think the character would act rather than how I would, this makes choosing the right dialogue options way easier. I get to decide the entire character arc of V from start to finish, and Corpo is the best way to create the most satisfying narrative. As I said, you need to give your character faults if you want the player to engage with them. And Street Kids and Nomads don't give your character any major faults. These two life paths make V a victim of circumstance. Where they were born decided how their journey began. And these two origins are easy to root for. Making your character an outsider or an underdog are two of the most common protagonist tropes. But making your character someone who had the choice of what they want to do with their lives, and having them choose to give it to the corporations that are ruining the world, is a fantastic character flaw. It gives V a starting point with faults for them to overcome, and it's a great place for a character arc to start. It's also the only life path that works well with all of Cyberpunk's endings. If the player chooses to let Johnny take control, then it means V has learned that human connection is more important than status and fame, what they were trying to achieve at the start of the game. It's the same if V chooses to go with the Nomads. V has chosen their new family over the goal they pointlessly slave towards for their entire life. The big one is the Arasaka ending. If you get this ending and you don't pick the Corpo life path, then Cyberpunk has one of the dumbest stories in video game history. Why on God's barren earth would someone who lived their life as a criminal or a wanderer ever in 2077 years ever trust Arasaka over their friends or try doing things alone? But for Corpo V, this makes sense. They're giving in to their weakness and their desire to reclaim their old life. They think that maybe if they abandon their crazy quest and go back to Arasaka, they can save themselves and restore their life to normalcy. Cyberpunk 2077 is no Witcher 3, there's no argument to be made there. But the life paths, while a letdown in the gameplay department and how much of an effect they have on the story, for someone like me who roleplays as their character rather than as themselves, they're a godsend, and none of these life paths is a more effective choice than Corpo, which gives Cyberpunk an immensely satisfying ending no matter what choices you make.